Good morning, moms of Master Books. We hope you're having an awesome day. I am blessed today to have author Debbie Lawrence, who is the author of God's Design Science, the series. And we're going to get to know a little bit more about her and the heart behind writing God's Design Science, as well as the series itself. So just to avoid any confusion before I start, God's Design Science has been around for a lot of years. How many years, Debbie, has?
We started in 2002.
2002. And there was the original edition, then Answers in Genesis began publishing the God's Design Science, and then they did another edition of it, right? I think.
That's correct. It was originally black and white, and then Answers in Genesis. We did a whole new layout and redesign, and then it made it full color.
Okay. And then Master Books obtained a license to publish it using the Master Books format. And so the Master Books format is different than the God's Design series published by Answers in Genesis. Answers in Genesis still sells that product to CBD and Rainbow and all of the wholesale market. So the only place that sells the Master Books editions is masterbooks.com. And what essentially the biggest difference is, there were 6 workbooks. Each topic was broken down. So like for the chemistry and ecology book, there was properties of matter, properties of ecosystems, properties of atoms and molecules. They would each have a student book and a teacher guide. So you would have 6 books. We combine them into 2 books. So now you have a student book, the teacher book, and then we added the Master Books daily lesson plan in the beginning. So it's a little bit more open and go. I think we added in some tests or some quizzes for homeschoolers that want to use more of a traditional model of that method as well. So there's a few tweaks to it. The content is the same, and the heart behind the series is the same, but it's just a different format for people that are used to Master Books, a little bit more of that open and go solution. This is more in that format. So Debbie, did you and your husband write the series?
Both of our names are on the books. I essentially wrote the lessons. He wrote the biographical content that's in there. So most of those things about the different scientists and things like that, he wrote those.
Gotcha. So can you tell us a little bit about who are the Lawrences, and how did you come about to write a science curriculum?
Okay. My husband is Richard. We've been married 30. Oh, sorry. Sorry. We've been married 37 years. We have 4 adult children, and then we just recently adopted a grandson who is 3. So we're doing the parenting thing over again. We met in college, Richard and I, when we were both in engineering school. So we both have an electrical engineering background. We both worked at Hewlett Packard, but once we had children, I decided to stay home with them, and so became a stay-at-home mom. Had no intention of homeschooling at all, but our second son, when he was in 1st grade, was really struggling. He's ADD and had a really hard time in a traditional school setting. So we decided to homeschool. And so that's kind of how we got into it. Decided to bring all the kids home and teach them at home. Like most homeschoolers, we thought, we'll do this 1 year and see how it goes. And the next year we'll do it 1 more year and see how it goes. And pretty soon it was just our life.
Yeah.
As I was doing that, I could not find any Bible-based, creation-based science that we were happy with. So I was just drawing, using some master's books, Answers in Genesis books, and putting my own lessons together. And after doing that for about 2 years, I approached my husband and said, what do you think about writing our own curriculum? And what we thought that entailed and what it actually entailed were 2 very different things. we thought, oh, we'll type something up and take it to the local homeschool conference and see if anybody's interested. And it ended up being a lifetime project.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you did.
Yeah.
Now, so at the time that you wrote it, Apologia Science was, and still is, one of the more popular science curriculums. How would you contrast it to Apologia? Like, why not use Apologia? Why did you create God's Design?
Well, at the time I started working on this, Apologia really only had their middle school and high school curriculum. They didn't have an elementary curriculum.
Yep.
And we actually talked with Dr. Weil about the possibility of doing an elementary curriculum with him. And his ideas were different than ours. He wanted to go a different direction than what we did. But the Apologia elementary curriculum really was developed about the same time as ours.
Okay, that would make sense, because
Yeah,
most of that,
a year or two behind where we were at.
yeah, okay. So to somebody who's never heard of God's Design Science before, how do you describe it? If you were at a convention and I walked up to you and said, tell me about your science, what would be your elevator pitch?
I haven't done this pitch for a while. It's been a while since we've been at conferences, but basically what we have is we have 4 series of books. So we cover all of the basic topics. We have a life science series, earth science, chemistry, and physics, or physical science. Each of those contains 3 books or 3 topics, and they're designed for 3rd through 8th graders. It's a very hands-on curriculum, so the way that it's set up, each lesson has a section that you would read together if you're doing it with your child. If your child is a good reader, they could read it on their own. So they read the section that introduces the basic material, and no matter what grades, 3rd through 8th, they would do that.
Okay.
There's a hands-on activity in every lesson. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a science experiment, though there are a lot of experiments in there, but it might be something, it might be a research sort of thing or a craft sort of thing that relates to that topic. And so they would do that hands-on activity, and then there is a set of questions that there's what did we learn questions and taking it further questions. And so that's, cover the basic material and then apply what you learned. So if you're doing like 3rd through 5th grade, you would be done at that point.
Okay.
Have 6th through 8th graders, then we have additional, what we call the challenge section of each lesson. And that's specifically for older children, and it introduces more in-depth material and often has additional hands-on activities that go along with that. Okay. So that's the basic, method for each lesson. Each book, if you look like it's the animals book, has 35 lessons. And so if you wanted to do 3 lessons a week, you could cover 3 books or the whole entire life series or earth series in one school year, doing 3 lessons a week.
Okay. Yeah, we've got it set up on a 180-day schedule. So each book is broken up over the 36 weeks. I think it's set up 5. Let me just make sure I say this right.
It probably is 4 or 5 days a week.
4 days.
Doing the quizzes and things like that on additional days. And there's also some biographies and things like that you could do that aren't directly included in the lesson. They're scattered throughout the book that you could include on those other days of the week. And I know that that's included in the Master's book schedule.
Now, what percentage of involvement would it require for a mom? How involved would she have to be? And does that change working with a 3rd grader versus working with an 8th grader?
Oh, it definitely changes. It depends how well your child reads on their own and how involved you want to be. When I developed the curriculum, I had 4 children that are about 6 years apart, and I just wanted them to do as many things together as possible. And so, I would present the material, and we actually did a lot of the questions just orally together, do the activities together. Once my oldest son got, 7th, 8th grade, then he definitely did all of his science on his own. And if you have a child who reads well, they certainly could do the reading and all of the questions. I know Master's Books has the questions all written out in like a workbook. Mm-hmm. Write out the answers on their own. So it's kind of how comfortable you are with letting them work on their own. Activities are fun to do as a group regardless, but most of the activities are pretty simple and could be done on their own, though there's a few that need adult supervision.
Yeah. I think too, the nice thing about having a multi-grade, we often think if I was to buy a curriculum that had 4 different levels and 4 different topics, and I'm having to sit there teaching those topics, it's going to be exhausting. But when we have one topic that the whole family is sitting and doing, it's only 30 minutes a day that mom is being involved in that subject rather than 2 hours. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why, when I was homeschooling, I wanted to do history and science and Bible and things like that, that weren't so grade specific. Mm-hmm. With all of the kids together, so that I didn't have to have, 4 different science curriculums and 4 different history curriculums and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Because, if you started homeschooling, we started homeschooling around 1995, 96, I think. And there weren't the options that there are now. I mean, we were so limited in what we had. So, you had to be more creative.
Right.
And then experiments for a family, our family, experiments tend to be one of those, we call them friction points, where everything is going well until it comes to an experiment. What was your philosophy behind that? Because I know you use a lot of standard items. And I don't know, was a kit ever developed do you know if there's one in the market? I never really researched that.
At one time, I think there may have been like Nature's Workshop or something like that might have offered a kit. We really tried to use things that most people have already in their kitchen. There is a list included with each book of mm-hmm. all of the items you need. So you could easily, at the beginning of the year, look through there and say, the only thing on this list I don't have is X, Y, and Z, and just go buy those items. And then you have everything you need for the whole year.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty easy to do that yourself. I don't know of anybody who's specifically selling a kit. Yeah. But, we really tried to make it, things that you have already in your kitchen for the most part.
Somebody just asked, if you had a student who was a struggling reader, how would you navigate through that? I would assume you would recommend the mom do the reading or work together with some of the reading?
That's certainly what I would recommend, yes. Just read it together, do the questions orally. Mm-hmm. You'll be done in about 20 or 30 minutes. And so, at the activity, the experiments take a little bit more time, but the reading part is not super long.
Right.
I would definitely say just do it together, do it orally. And that's what I did with my kids, especially the one that I had that was ADD. He had trouble with reading and sitting still, and we would just sit down and do it together. And then he was happy to go do the hands-on experiments and not have to do a lot of handwriting sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things Master Books is well known for is we enter the arena all the time with young earth creation apologetics. And all of our curriculum has a faith builder guarantee that if the faith of your child doesn't grow as a result of using the curriculum, we refund your money 100%. We were comfortable bringing God's design under that guarantee because we know the worldview is very solid, and we know creation is definitely discussed from a biblical worldview. How did you take the stance that you did, and can you just discuss that a little bit in the materials?
Sure. I would say that when I grew up in a Christian family. I don't remember ever really discussing creation versus evolution in our family. So when I went to high school and college and started learning about evolution, I just kind of took the attitude, well, God must have guided evolution if it was true. And I didn't really know how to deal with that. And then when we became homeschoolers, we went to a homeschool conference, and Ken Ham was the speaker there. And he got up and was talking about how if you believe the Bible is true and you believe that Adam sinned, and because of Adam's sin, death came into the world, and that's why Jesus had to come, you can't believe in evolution. And those two ideas don't work together theologically. And it opened my mind to a whole new idea that, wow, maybe evolution isn't true. And so we started getting as many books as we could from Answers in Genesis and really looking into the whole idea of my husband and I are both engineers. We're like, can you be a scientist and not believe in evolution? And we started reading all the AIG material and realized, yeah, you can be a scientist and be a Christian, and you don't have to believe in evolution. And it changed our hearts. And so that's when we started teaching our children. We wanted science that taught them that, yeah, you can know the science, you can be a good scientist and be a Christian and not believe evolution. Mm-hmm. And so that was where our heart was and why we developed the curriculum that we did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we've tried our best just to put it as naturally into the curriculum as possible. We didn't want it to feel like it was added on top of, or that we were cramming it down anybody's throat, but we wanted it just to be a natural, this is how, God created the world. This is how God made things. And, this is, the evidence that supports a young earth view.
Yeah.
So that's throughout all of the curriculum.
That's awesome. Okay, so with the curriculum itself, one of the questions that can come up, and I mentioned Apologia in the comparison, and we definitely have high respect for Apologia as a curriculum, but I want to just, how would you contrast the two? You were in the competitive marketplace with them, so you were used to somebody saying, how does this differ from Apologia? What would your answer be to that?
Well, for one thing, we cover a lot more topics than the Apologia. They kind of concentrate on the life sciences. I think they have a chemistry curriculum, but they don't cover all of the areas that we cover. Mm-hmm. I think that we also are looking at a broader age range. So we've added those challenge sections for the older kids. We've also been developing the beginner series for first and second graders. And so we have the life science for beginners now that's specifically for like kindergarten through second grade. Mm-hmm. Have a broader range that it covers. The Apologia is good, solid, creation science as well. I feel like ours has a lot more hands-on activities than theirs does.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the basic differences.
Okay. Most of what you have would be the equivalent of an elementary. It would give familiarity to a student in the major sciences like chemistry and physics and biology. And so that when they move into high school, they've already had an introduction to those topics versus, I think with Apologia and the way that it's done, a lot of people love the elementary series, but then when they get to high school, it seems kind of like, oh my goodness, what just happened? Right. Because it changes so much, where I don't think the transition out of God's design science into any legitimate high school course is going to be that big of a shock, because they've already been introduced to so much of the applied sciences in those topics already.
Right, I would definitely agree with that, and we definitely want the students who use our curriculum to feel like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. When I did the physical science or the physics course, oh yeah, we learned about forces and that sort of thing. So it's not totally foreign to them.
And they've applied it and used it. And I would say too that the creation aspect in God's design is more integrated, where Apologia is definitely not against young earth creation, but it's not as integrated into it. It acknowledges it, but then it teaches science, where God's design is more an integrated God's design and science integrated all throughout. And you may have your own thought on this. When we started homeschooling, we wanted to keep our kids out of, we didn't want them going to jail, and we didn't want our kids being taken away from by CPS. So everybody wanted to have the most advanced, complicated books that we could, right? Like you wanted the math curriculum that was going to make your kid high school or college level by the time they were in 9th grade, or those things. And I would say that some people may consider it more rigorous, the Apologia method be a little bit more rigorous than God's design as they move into the high school levels, but I wouldn't say that that's at all true. I think God's design is actually much more rigorous in the topics it covers and the amount of applied use that you have.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we have tried to cover all of the major topics and tie them all together in a way that makes sense to the student, and with the hands-on activities, I think they retain it better than a lot of other curriculums. Mm-hmm. So I definitely think that that's true. I haven't sat down one-on-one and compared exactly every topic that we cover versus what Apologia covers.
Yeah.
But I do think that the God's design covers the vast majority of the topics that a student needs to know by the time they get to 9th grade and ready for biology and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
The other benefit I would say of this curriculum, especially when it comes to the apologetic standpoint, is because you work with Answers in Genesis, their editorial review board is very detailed. And so I can guarantee that every single word in these books has been reviewed by their editorial review board, and that they would question the science if it was being taught in a way that was different or loony. If I could add that, they would want to make sure that it fit what they're learning, and all the PhDs that are on staff would have input in that as well. So this curriculum wasn't just developed, been in the market for a while, and it's also been under some pretty strong critique, I would assume, working with AIG.
That's true, and we've gone through 2 complete revisions with them, and so it's been reviewed more than one time.
Yeah.
So it's not just like we did it once and then we made changes, but every time we've gone through a complete new edition, it's been reviewed again. Yeah.
I know every time we do a book with them, it's amazing how they'll, this word could cause an issue, or this word may cause an issue. And so that's a level of comfort I would say to anybody who's considering God's design, is to know that it's also had the full weight and power of Answers in Genesis ministry, looking it over and making sure that it fit the science that young earth creationists, for the most part, would stand behind as well. So,
yeah, and with our most recent edition, there was a lot of review for what has changed in science in the last few years. So we updated things a couple of years ago, and added new things like digital TVs and things like that weren't around when we originally wrote the original curriculum. So
yeah, which I would say for a lot of, if you're comparing to other curriculums, a lot of us don't often think about copyright dates. But when you look at a copyright date, one of the nice things about Master Books, and I know with AIG and the God's Design Project, is science is changing. And so some of the science books that are popular in homeschooling right now were written in the early 2000s, but things have changed. And so if the science isn't being updated and the books aren't being updated, your student may not be learning the most current theories, scientific theories. Of course, God's word doesn't change, but sometimes our understanding and our theories of what happened does. And so I think that that's one benefit with God's design is it has been reviewed. Since I've been here, I know that AIG did is it 2016 that they redid?
Most recent one, yes.
Yeah. So we know that it's had a very current review of the science as well. So we just did a biology series, a master's class biology and chemistry series with Dr. Englund. And it's amazing as he's looking at the Human Genome Project and different things to see how different a science that's written in 2019 is compared to a science that was written in 2005. So,
right.
And I say this a lot in this group, but I say science is the pursuit of truth. It's not the truth. And so it's always changing. Our understanding of truth is changing until, the Lord gives us perfect revelation of everything.
That's right, which is why it's important to start with the Bible that doesn't change.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so then the other question I have is a lot of times people will ask, well, what about using this for high school courses? Have you seen that where families have used it and adapted it towards high school? Do you recommend that? What would be your stand on that?
Well, I would say it depends on what your child is planning to do. If you and your child are planning for your child to go to college and you want to get into, a recognized university, they're going to be looking for a high school biology class, a high school chemistry class, that sort of thing. And that is not the intent of God's design science. It does not have the detail of a high school level science course. If you have a child and your child is really struggling, especially in math, and chemistry and physics are not on their radar from a high school level, and they're not going to go to college, it's a good curriculum for presenting the basics.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are looking to have a child who's interested in physics but not on the mathematical level of high school physics, it will introduce the basic ideas and give them a really good idea and appreciation for physics, but it would not be recognized as a high school physics course.
That's a good answer. Good answer. So, okay. I don't know that I have any other questions. I'm really excited that we're able to offer this to our customers. And, for us, the heart of Master Books is definitely helping families win, but also preparing these kids for the giants that they're going to face. And culture is disintegrating before our eyes. And to have a complete understanding of biblical authority and be able to defend God's word and believe it is so important to us. And so we so appreciate you guys being agreeable to Master Books, representing the product, and putting it in a format that's a little bit different. But it's been tremendously successful, and we're so excited about it.
Well, we're excited to be working with you and be able to reach more people. So.
Yeah, well, this group, and you're part of the Moms of Master Books, right? I tagged you from the group. So, yeah, we love having authors in the group, and this live will go up as soon as we're done. And I know that there's some comments and questions. I don't see a lot of questions necessarily, but I will go through and answer any questions as well that may come up. So,
before we started, one question that I would like to answer. Mm-hmm. Somebody had asked about using the beginners books along with the regular God's Design Science books. And we wrote the beginner books. I wrote them pretty much lesson for lesson, the same topic as in the older kids' books. So if a mom does have a fourth grader and a first grader, you could certainly use the beginner book and the regular book together, and you'll be covering pretty much the same topic, but the First grader will have, activities and things that are more at their level. And so they definitely could use those books together at the same time.
And I believe the moderators would know this, but in our files, we actually have a custom daily lesson plan that helps coordinate, because there were just a few exceptions or something.
A few exceptions.
So it just kind of helps marry the two up a little bit. And then Heaven and Earth is coming out. Am I right?
It should be out in the spring.
Okay. And yeah, we've sold a tremendous amount of Life for Beginners. And I know that there's a lot of people just waiting for Heaven and Earth. Any plan to continue doing series?
Beginner stuff, probably not.
Okay.
Chemistry really is a little above first and second graders' interest level and abilities. So
yeah,
we're going to stick with the life and earth sciences.
Yeah, I agree. There's some complex abstract thinking that takes place that's really better suited for students a little bit farther on. Talking about that, you said that your son had struggled a little bit. What about third or fourth grade? How worried would you be if a student is doing it, but maybe not memorizing everything or grasping all the concepts?
I would not be worried at all. My experience has been that students catch up eventually. My son, the one that I was talking about, he didn't start reading on his own till he was in third grade. And he's now, he's 30 years old now. He has his own business. He's doing very well. He reads everything on the internet and calls me regularly and says, "Hey, Mom, this is what you should do for your next science, whatever." And so, even though he really struggled, he caught up eventually. And I would not worry about it. Just keep moving forward. And even if you're moving in little tiny steps to begin with, as long as you're moving forward a little bit, that's all that really matters.
Yeah.
And it may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it eventually works out.
So in those grades, if students are getting exposure to it, they're doing some hands-on, would you cycle back around? Like if I started in third grade, what would you do when I hit 7th grade? Would you do any of the courses over again in another cycle, or how would you recommend that?
Certainly could do that. If you started like in first grade and did, life science and earth science, and then by the time you get into third grade, do the chemistry and physics, then you could do the whole series over again.
Okay.
If you did 1st through 8th grade, you could do the whole series twice, starting with the beginners lessons. And yeah, you'd definitely be exposed to it twice, and the second time around the student's gonna learn it so much deeper and remember it so much more. So yeah, you definitely could do that.
That raises a good point, because we kind of have a recommended schedule that we say we would start with life science, just because for a third grader it's a little bit easier to understand because it's so, it's the world around us. But so you mentioned chemistry, going into chemistry like in third grade. No worries there, or is there something that a parent would want to just be aware of?
Obviously, if your student is really struggling and saying, "Oh, I don't get this," you might want to do something different. But for the most part, you're introducing the ideas of, everything's made up of atoms, and an atom, we use like marshmallows, colored marshmallows or something to make an atomic model. So, this is kind of what a water molecule looks like, that sort of thing. So you're introducing those ideas. If the student doesn't really, fully understand it, that's okay, because you're going to do it again when they get into junior high or high school. And, it gives them an idea of what chemistry is all about. There's a lot of cooking and just really fun things in the chemistry curriculum that any age is going to enjoy.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Then I think a lot of times, especially when you're new to homeschooling and you're starting out, you just have that panic that if my child doesn't understand or memorize everything in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I fail them and they're not going they're just going to be a failure in life. They'll be on the streets, and learning that you can't possibly teach your student everything by the time they graduate. I mean, the world is just now too big.
That's right. And I mean, just think about yourself. If you read a book and then, you know, 2 months later, somebody asked you details about that book, you're not going to, as an adult, remember everything that you learned.
That's
and
really
so, you know, you can't expect our children to, you know, long-term memory of every single thing that they've read or heard in homeschooling. But, you know, it's a continuous learning process. You just, it's a lifetime process. It's not, you know, this is what we did this year and we're never going to cover it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the parting, what was your favorite course? Which one did you get the most enjoyment out of writing?
Oh, that's hard. I probably enjoyed, as an engineer, writing the inventions and technology book the most. It's probably the least hardcore science in the fact that, you know, it doesn't have what you would find in a physics course, but it's a engineering book in the fact of this is how physics is applied in the real world, and this is where we see it every day. So I think I enjoyed writing that one the most.
So for a student that would be kind of mechanically oriented, and that would be, yeah. I remember when it came out, our kids in the warehouse, they were down in the warehouse and they would love going through the books, and that was one of the books that they definitely got a kick out of. So awesome. Well, thank you for joining us and for being part of this group, and for serving the homeschool community the way you have. We're indebted to you.
Well, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, moms, I hope this was valuable, and I hope that you were able to get some tips out of it. If you have any questions, be sure to post it. We'll go through and try to answer them to the best we can. And I pray you have a blessed day. Thursday for teaching tips, we will be talking a little bit about preparing your student for a career planning, just even at an early age, some of the things that you could be starting to think about and work towards launching your kids when they graduate. All right, so hope to see you then. God bless you all. We will talk to you later.